If you've seen some of the other videos on my channel, you'll know that recently I've started doing some volunteer work. One thing that I'm doing is walking dogs that are in the local shelter waiting for their forever homes. The other thing that I have recently started doing is going through the process of getting trained to help with wildlife. I am thinking about doing more of the training just so I could learn more about the animals. It is really interesting to know all of these things. But that being said, I don't think I could ever do some of the things you have to do to be able to save a Joey. I think I would just protect mum and wait for someone else to come and save the Joey because I just couldn't emotionally cope with that. But it is actually something I was thinking the other day is kind of like a strange research for Project Australia. So I am currently working at a refuge and assisting with wombat care. I do work a little bit with emus, but it's more just poop patrol and putting out some food for them. With the wombats, I actually get to feed them, which is lovely. But it's part of a training process, so that is a skill that I'm going to be developing over time, and that is really exciting. But it's lovely to learn really firsthand about these animals and really more intricate, detailed information about these animals. Like, I never knew that bats were actually a really important pollinator, and that people are doing horrible things that are basically reducing bat numbers, and that means that certain trees aren't getting what they need from the bat as a pollinator, which means that the koalas are really struggling to find food, not only because of the fires, but because of the bat population. Like, that to me was really, really interesting. So I am thinking about doing other courses just to learn about the animals. I think from that perspective, it's going to be really useful from a research perspective, and it's also a really awesome way to research. Like, if all research projects involved snuggling wombats while they're in their pouch and giving them a bottle and patting their bum while they have their bottle, like, I'm in. Because Project Australia is aiming to be a middle school book, I have started reading a few books targeted at younger ages. Wandy is one of them. It is not so much a middle school, it is more for younger kids, but I read that today in like 10-15 minutes. It's obviously a quick read for adults, but it's just about a little dingo who gets picked up by an eagle and finds himself in what is essentially an animal shelter, and he bonds with another dingo called Hermione, and then it's a fairly quick story about them. And so part of the point of reading books like this is to kind of really research the writing style and sort of the depth of story that is delivered for younger populations, and to kind of like also look at how people are weaving in aspects of Australian wildlife, Australian nature and things like that. And so I am keeping an eye out for books of all levels that kind of have that Australian base in it, because I would like to find some examples of how it's done. My idea for Project Australia is that it will be middle school age range, that it brings in elements of magic and fantasy, but there is a very strong base in Australia with the landscape and the animals are involved in the story. And so doing things like I'm doing at the moment, like traveling, really is extremely helpful to that process, because like some areas I haven't been to in a really long time, and so they look different now to how they used to look. Like, for example, Hill End, which I recently went to. I used to go camping there with my family as a kid, and I only ever remember it being bone dry. It was also winter when I went there, whereas we are in like the first week of summer here, and it has been a very wet spring. And so when I went there, it was about as green as Australian countryside ever gets. And so it was really interesting to sort of see the difference in the landscape and in the plants and things like that. And to see things like, you know, I was driving on the road as I left Hill End, and it's kind of this mountainous kind of rocky area with a lot of quartz and gold in the region. And as I was coming down the mountain, there were these things in the road that looked like weird leaves or weird sticks from a distance, and then you would suddenly realize there were these varying sized lizards that were having their head up as they were sunbaking in the road, like loud and proud, just enjoying the sun. And they were like some were pretty big. And so you see them in the road, and then all of a sudden you get a very slight change in the trees and in the grasses and in how hilly the landscape is and the type of rocks and hills that were in the landscape. And then I never saw any lizards again on the road. So that sort of thing is really interesting and really helpful. And because I'm mostly in a coastal area, even if it is really bushy, it's still great to kind of immerse myself in that Australian landscape so that I can hopefully capture it more vividly, because I feel like particularly things like the colors of Australian landscape are very specific. It's a very specific color palette. And even like, I definitely feel when you look at the bush, sometimes it does really look quite scrubby, and it can look a bit messy and not all that appealing when you look at it just as a broad look. But if you start to look at each individual tree or each area, you actually start to see that there are these beautiful silvery gums, and they have all this patterning on them, on scribbly gums, and that they have just these beautiful textures and colors that you don't actually necessarily take in when you're looking at the broader picture, because it's a lot when you're looking at the broader picture. And you know, sometimes you're just looking for snakes on the ground and things like that. But traveling is really helpful for me in kind of capturing that again. Obviously, the most enjoyable part of the research is some of the accidental research I've fallen into, like working with wombats. It is really interesting to learn all these details about the animals and like about the palates of kangaroos and things like that, that I don't know how much detail I'm going to be bringing into the book, because obviously it's in the fairly early stages. But yeah, it's been quite an interesting sort of book to prepare myself to write. And also, you know, there are a lot of programs with featured kind of documentaries on emus and dingoes and wombats and things like that. So even though I've always lived in Australia, except for little bits here and there, and you think you kind of know them, these animals kind of instinctively, you really don't learn much about them at school. And it has been a very fascinating journey to kind of learn more, to write more for Project Australia. Where I'm at is I've written kind of the first, I think it's 3 chapters, and it's that kind of trying to get the world going and the creation going, and sort of define the limits of the magic within the world that is kind of arduous at the moment. But like, I have a lot of ideas for things I want to happen in the book. So I think what I'm probably going to do is start writing the rest of the book, and then I'll deal with the beginning of the book later. For me, I tend to generally just write whatever comes to me. So for the Phoenix series, which is a YA series with magic and wizards and a school where they all go to learn magic, and vampires and werewolves and elves and this whole world, that world creation part took a lot of time to do and to think about and to try and like make it so that it melded well, because you don't want someone to read the book and be like, oh, it doesn't work, that doesn't match up with what you said before. So with that, what I have kind of done is, when I've been inspired and had these kind of scenes come to my mind, kind of like a movie or whatever, I just write that scene and I come back to it later, and inevitably it finds a way to work its way in, or it becomes the basis from which you build the rest around. But I can't say that I write in chronological order. It's just not the way it works for me. And I find when I try and make myself write in chronological order, like I have again this last 3 days while I've been on a writer's retreat, I find I really struggle, and it feels more like work than escapism and joy. And I really like it when writing feels like escapism and joy, as opposed to feeling like I'm just trying to make something work. Plot-wise, I think this book I am going to pants it a little bit more, whereas the Phoenix series is a bit more planned out because I know it's going to be 6 books and I know I want to hit a certain endpoint, and so for that to work, character arcs have to do certain things and people have to hit certain points, and so it has to be a little bit more planned out. But for this one, it feels like more of a pantsing project. But that's just a little update on Project Australia, which is not something that I was actually intending on working on this year. I was kind of hoping in the next 6 months I was going to just focus on the Phoenix series and try and get it done. But, you know, inspiration comes when it so chooses, and I guess that's kind of the byproduct of me driving around New South Wales at the moment, is that it's flicked a switch in my mind and made me start thinking about that project a little bit more, and kind of made it so it's at the forefront of what I'm thinking about, and so that is equaling starting Project Australia a little bit earlier than what I had anticipated. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like it and subscribe to my channel. It really helps my channel grow and I really would appreciate the support. You can also check me out on Instagram and Twitter at Pip Coomes, and you can check out the books I've published so far, which is the first 2 books of the Phoenix series, The Hunted and A Night Rises. They are sold anywhere where books are sold in ebook and paperback format.